The ocean, vast and unknowable, holds many secrets. Beneath its shimmering surface lies a world of wonder and terror, where creatures of unimaginable power roam. For centuries, sailors have whispered tales of these creatures, their voices hushed with fear and respect. They speak of leviathans that dwarf ships, of kraken that drag men to watery graves, and of sharks, the apex predators of the deep. But what happens when the terror of the deep finds its way onto land? This is the story of Sharkness, a tale of ancient curses, ghostly predators, and the forest that became their hunting ground. Off the rugged coast of insert location, where the waves crash against the shore with unrelenting fury, lies a forest unlike any other. Locals call it the Blackheart Woods, a name whispered in hushed tones, a name that sends chills down the spines of even the most hardened seafarers. For it is said that this forest is cursed, haunted by the spirits of sharks who met their end under a bloody moon. The legend dates back centuries, to a time when pirates ruled the seas and the land was still wild and untamed. The spirits of the slaughtered sharks, their rage as boundless as the ocean itself, rose from the depths, no longer bound by flesh and bone, but by a thirst for vengeance that could never be quenched. The Blackheart Woods became their domain, a place where the boundaries between the ocean and the land blurred, where the air was thick with the scent of salt and decay. The trees themselves seemed to twist and contort, their branches reaching out like skeletal claws. The forest floor was littered with the bones of those foolish enough to venture within, a stark reminder of the power that lurked in the shadows. Over the centuries, the legend of Sharkness has been passed down from generation to generation. They have seen the shadows moving amongst the trees, heard the eerie slapping sound of fins on dry land, felt the cold dread that seeps into your bones when you realize that you are not alone. The year is 1705. On the eve of a raging storm, a group of teenagers gathered around a bonfire on the beach, their youthful laughter echoing against the roar of the waves.
Have you heard the one about the sharks that swim through the trees? Thomas chuckled, his voice barely audible above the wind.
Don't be ridiculous, Thomas, scoffed Elizabeth, her blonde curls whipping around her face. Those are just stories, myths meant to scare children.
But tonight, they craved adventure, a taste of the forbidden, and the Blackheart Woods was their destination. The others murmured in agreement, but their laughter was strained, their eyes darting nervously towards the dark, imposing silhouette of the Blackheart Woods that loomed at the edge of the beach.
I dare you. I dare you to spend the night in the Blackheart Woods. Just one night. If you survive, I'll give you my father's gold coin.
Elizabeth's eyes widened. The coin was a prized possession, a symbol of adventure and rebellion.
Fine, we'll do it. We'll show you all that there's nothing to fear in those woods.
Her friends exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to back down. It was old man Silas, a Native American elder who lived a solitary life on the outskirts of their village. As they gathered their belongings, a figure emerged from the shadows.
Turn back while you still can. And forgotten powers, of ancient spirits. They are a place of darkness. You should not go into those woods.
The teenagers scoffed at his words, dismissing them as the ramblings of an old man.
We're not afraid of a few ghost stories, old man.
Silas shook his head sadly, knowing their arrogance would be their undoing. With a mix of bravado and trepidation, the teenagers entered the Blackheart Woods. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. As darkness descended, the forest came alive with strange and unsettling sounds. The wind howled through the trees, its mournful cry sounding like the screams of the damned. Elizabeth, her earlier confidence waning, felt a shiver run down her spine. The forest was different than she had imagined. She glanced back at her friends, their faces pale and drawn in the fading light. Their laughter was gone, replaced by a nervous silence that spoke volumes. They had crossed a threshold, stepped into a realm where the familiar rules no longer applied, and they were beginning to realize that there was no turning back. Centuries have passed since the night the storm swallowed the Blackheart Seven, as the villagers came to call them. Their story, once whispered in terror, faded into local legend, a cautionary tale told to keep children from wandering too far. The year is now 2024. Technology illuminated the world, casting its artificial glow even into the darkest corners of history. For a group of teenagers, Danielle, Kyle, Jared, Emily, Mike, and Stacy, the legend of the Blackheart Woods was little more than a local myth, something to scoff at between sips of lukewarm energy drinks. They were children of the digital age, their lives a blur of instant gratification and fleeting trends.
You guys seriously believe that crap about ghost sharks?
Kyle laughed, his voice barely audible above the roar of the engine and the thumping bass line from the car speakers.
Of course not, but it'll be fun to prove those townies wrong, right?
They had found their adventure, a challenge to conquer, a myth to debunk. The Blackheart Woods, once feared and avoided, now represented the ultimate test of their courage.
What if something happens?
The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, purple, and blood red as they finally reached the edge of the Blackheart Woods.
Whoa.
Jared breathed, his gaze sweeping over the towering trees that seemed to press in on them from all sides.
This is creepy. Maybe we should just head back.
Don't be such a scaredy cat, Stace. It's just a forest.
They ventured deeper into the woods, the sounds of the modern world fading with every step. The air grew thick with humidity, each breath heavy and damp.
Did you hear that?
A strange slapping sound echoed through the stillness, like something heavy dragging itself across the forest floor.
Probably just a deer.
The air felt charged, electric, as if something was about to happen. Something big, something terrifying. Hours seemed to melt away like mist under a scorching sun. The deeper they ventured into the Blackheart Woods, the more disorienting it became.
I think we're lost.
Jared said, his voice tight with a calmness he didn't feel.
Lost? Impossible. It's just a bunch of trees.
Kyle scoffed, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his bravado. Emily, her eyes wide with a growing sense of dread, took a step back.
Do you hear that?
A low, guttural sound echoed through the trees like the rasping breath of something large and hungry.
It's probably just the wind.
But Stacy was too preoccupied with her own fear to offer any comfort. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate in her very bones, a sound that spoke of a presence both ancient and malevolent. The forest floor, once bathed in the fading light of the setting sun, grew dark, the shadows lengthening and twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe and pulse with a life of their own. The air, thick and heavy, took on a strange metallic tang, like the smell of blood carried on the wind.
What was that?
A large, shadowy figure had darted between the trees, its form barely discernible in the fading light. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, like something swimming through the air, its passage marked by a fleeting glimpse of glistening scales and the rustle of leaves that seemed to cling to its form.
Did you see that? It was like something out of a nightmare.
Panic surged through the group, their carefully constructed facade of indifference crumbling like dry leaves underfoot. They scattered, their instincts taking over, each desperate to escape the unseen terror that stalked them.
Stay together!
She lunged for Jared's hand, her fingers closing around empty air as he disappeared into the undergrowth. The forest, once silent, now echoed with the sounds of their terror. Branches snapped, leaves rustled, and the guttural rasping grew louder, closer, as if the very woods themselves were closing in, herding them towards an inevitable fate. They were no longer tourists in this strange and terrifying land. They were prey, and the hunt had begun. Danielle pushed through a tangle of thorny vines, her lungs burning. Her heart pounded against her ribs. The forest floor tilted and swayed beneath her feet. A cry escaped as her foot caught on a root, sending her sprawling. Pain shot up her leg. She scrambled up, eyes darting, searching for any sign of escape. The forest offered only silence and the sense of being watched. A low growl sent a fresh wave of terror through her. It was close. The forest seemed to shift and twist around her, the paths she swore she had just run down disappearing into a tangle of undergrowth. Trees she could have sworn were maples a moment ago now resembled grotesque skeletal figures, their branches reaching out towards her like grasping claws. She stumbled back, her hand instinctively reaching out to steady herself against a nearby tree trunk. But as her fingers brushed against the rough bark, she felt a strange vibration, a low hum that seemed to resonate deep within her bones. It was as if the forest itself was alive, a sentient being toying with her, savoring her terror. The air grew thick and heavy, the scent of pine needles and damp earth replaced by a cloying metallic tang that made her stomach churn. She had to get out of here, now. She ran, her lungs screaming for air, her legs burning with exhaustion, but the forest offered no escape, only the endless repetition of trees and shadows, the oppressive silence broken only by the pounding of her own heart. A twig snapped behind her, and she whirled around, her eyes wide with terror. But there was nothing there, their leaves rustling like whispers on the wind. Kyle huddled behind a massive oak tree, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He had lost sight of the others, the forest swallowing them whole. He caught a glimpse of something large and shadowy moving between the trees. Every time he tried to get a closer look, it would vanish, leaving him to question his sanity. He was alone, hunted. He was starting to believe the stories of the Blackheart Woods, images of razor-sharp teeth, of cold, dead eyes, of blood staining the forest floor. He had to get out of here. He had to find the others. A low, guttural growl cut through his terror, sending ice-cold fear through his veins. He was not alone. Mike didn't even have time to scream. One moment he was stumbling through the undergrowth, his heart hammering against his ribs. The next, something huge and unseen slammed into him. He caught a fleeting glimpse of razor-sharp teeth, and then he was gone, swallowed by mist and shadow. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily, huddled beneath a fallen log, her eyes shut, felt the tremor in the earth. She didn't need to see it to know what it was. The scent of blood, thick and metallic, hung heavy in the air, a macabre beacon cutting through the humid stillness of the forest. It triggered a primal instinct in the surviving teenager's flight. Stacy ran until her lungs burned and her legs screamed for mercy. Thorns tore at her clothes, branches whipped at her face, but she didn't dare slow down. She burst into a small clearing, the remnants of an old stone well standing in the center. Moonlight filtered through the gaps in the trees, casting long, eerie shadows. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe that she was safe, but the forest offered no sanctuary. Jared, his back pressed against the rough bark of a towering oak, fumbled with the zipper of his backpack, his heart pounding against his ribs like a war drum. He had managed to hold on to his wits, his mind clinging to logic even as the world around him descended into a maelstrom of terror. He had to find something, anything, to defend himself. But the contents of his backpack, once mundane and comforting, now seemed woefully inadequate in the face of the supernatural horror that stalked them. A crumpled map, a half-eaten bag of trail mix, a flashlight, and a Swiss Army knife. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and forced himself to think. They were trapped, hunted by creatures that seemed to defy the laws of nature, but they were still sharks, weren't they? And sharks had weaknesses. He just had to figure out what they were. Danielle didn't know how long she had been running. All that mattered was putting distance between herself and the horrors that stalked the Blackheart Woods. She had lost track of the others, their cries for help swallowed by the relentless pursuit. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred, but still, she ran. She glanced over her shoulder, her blood turning to ice as she caught a glimpse of her pursuer. It was larger than she could have imagined, its form shifting and distorting in the moonlight. There was nowhere to run. The sharkness had found her. The Blackheart Woods, once echoing with the terrified cries of teenagers, fell silent. A chilling stillness settled over the ancient trees, their branches dripping with a ghostly mist. The air, thick with the metallic scent of blood, hung heavy and oppressive. Scattered amongst the ferns lay the remnants of the teenager's adventure, a lone sneaker, a shattered phone, its screen cracked like a spiderweb. Now there was only silence. Danielle, her clothes torn, her face pale and streaked with dirt, stumbled through the undergrowth, her every movement fueled by adrenaline and raw, primal fear. She had lost all track of time and direction. She had to keep moving, putting distance between herself and the horrors. The forest had become a nightmare realm of shadows and whispers. Every rustle, every snapping twig sent her heart hammering. She stumbled into a clearing, moonlight cutting through the canopy. Her legs buckled and she collapsed, sobbing. As dawn painted the forest floor, Danielle rose. She was alive, but at what cost? News of the teenager's disappearance spread through the small coastal town like wildfire, leaving a trail of grief and unanswered questions. Search parties were organized, but the Black Heart Woods yielded nothing. No bodies were ever found, except for their abandoned Jeep, parked at the edge of the trees, its windows smeared with a strange, viscous fluid. The locals whispered amongst themselves, their voices hushed with fear. The Black Heart Woods had claimed another generation, its ancient hunger sated for now. The legend of the Sharkness took on a chilling new life. The old fears resurfaced, whispering on the wind, carried on the salty air from the sea. The Black Heart Woods, silent and watchful, stood as a reminder that some places are best left undisturbed, some secrets best left buried. For deep within its shadowed depths, something ancient and hungry stirred. The Sharkness was real, and it was waiting. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of blood orange and deep purple, a lone fisherman felt a tremor run through the water, a ripple from the Black Heart River. He paused, his hand tightening around his fishing rod, his gaze drawn to the churning water. Dark, fin-like shapes broke the surface, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. The Sharkness was spreading, reaching out to claim new territory, spreading its terror. The hunt was far from over.